And I'm actually reading from the King James tonight. And I've got Tim LaHaye's Prophecy Study Bible. If you've never looked at this or seen this, it's interesting. And I'm going to read some things from it here in just a little bit. But let's read verses, starting with verse 1. Let's read a few verses. And then let's talk a little bit about what this is all about. It says, in the second year, you might want to underline that. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams. So apparently there was multiple dreams he had, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep, King James says, it brake or it left him. All right. So in other words, he had trouble sleeping. Have you ever had a night of dreams like that where it just kind of troubled you? You couldn't get back to sleep, and your mind just kept focusing in on either one dream or those dreams, and you just couldn't get away from it. I've had those, and finally I just had to get up. Right? That's just all there is to it. All right, verse 2. Then the king commanded to call the magicians and the astrologers, sorcerers, and the Chaldeans for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, or Aramaic, if you want to change that. It may say that in your Bible already. Aramaic or Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. Yeah, and you got to love Nebuchadnezzar at this point. What does he say? No, I don't think so. That's too easy. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. If you will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. Now, boy, that's encouraging. So obviously, it's one of those dreams. It was troubling. He knew it meant something, but he couldn't remember it either. All right. But if you show the dream and the interpretation thereof, you shall receive of the gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. And they answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we'll show you the interpretation of it. The king answered and said, I know of a certainty that you would gain the time, because you see the thing is gone from me. But if you will not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me, till the time be changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me the interpretation thereof. Folks, do you think he trusted these guys? That makes me wonder why he called them in any way. Obviously, he didn't trust them. He fully expected them to lie unto him, and so this is kind of odd, I think. All right. Pardon? Oh, okay. Does Chaldean translate into charlatan? Not that I am aware of. Okay, but I think that probably is no point well taken. All right, so let's kind of focus in on the main character here. This maybe not so handsome guy to my right. This is a depiction of King Nebuchadnezzar. And this may well be what he looked like. We have a lot of reliefs that kind of give some indication of what he may have looked like. This may be pretty close to what he might have looked like. Kind of a scary dude. Which most of these guys were pretty scary when you think about it. So Daniel chapter 2 has 49 verses, and it is the longest chapter in the book of Daniel, which is interesting. And it can be divided basically into 4 parts, and I'm doing this for those of you who love alliteration. And we're going to follow this to some point, to some degree. But the 4 parts are, first of all, the demand. Should have been, that's opposite, that's reversed. Should be the dream, the demand, the disclosure, or the interpretation, and then the dividend, Daniel's reward. Don't you love started it with all D's, so you can remember. So it should be the dream, the demand, the disclosure, and the dividend. So who is this guy, Nebuchadnezzar? Last week we talked about a lot of who's already, but I didn't talk a lot about Nebuchadnezzar. And I did that on purpose because I knew we were coming here. And we need to understand who Nebuchadnezzar is and kind of where he comes to the forefront in history. Probably we know him most for the fact that he conquered Judah and Jerusalem in about 605 BC. We might also understand and know the fact that he expanded the Babylonian Empire into an empire. It was pretty much a worldwide empire under the leadership of Nebuchadnezzar. He improved the lifestyle of the inhabitants of the Babylonian Empire, especially the city of Babylon. And he's probably most well known for transforming Babylon into one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, which also housed these hanging gardens of Babylon. Now, again, if you start reading the archaeologists and reading through histories, you're going to find there's a lot of question marks around whether these hanging gardens really ever existed. There's question marks around why he built them. It is believed, by some at least, that he made these gardens for one of his wives to make her feel more at home. Whether that's true or not, I don't know that we can know for sure. But we do know that Nebuchadnezzar is known more for building than he was for conquering. Okay? And next week, as we get into chapter 3, I think you're going to see that even more. And I don't want to spoil that, so I'm not going to say anything until we get there next week as to one of the big things that Nebuchadnezzar built that ties in a whole lot of history. All right. So Nebuchadnezzar ruled from about 605 to about 562 BC, about 43 years. Rather short term in the scheme of things. He was the oldest son of a fellow by the name of Nabopolassar, I'm sure I said that wrong, who was the founder of the Chaldean Empire. And we talked about the Chaldeans last week. Nebuchadnezzar's his name means, "O Nabu, watch over my heir." So we got to find out another who. Who is Nabu? Okay, who is Nabu? Anybody know who Nabu is? What? It says Marduk. Actually, Nabu isn't Marduk, but he was supposed to be the offspring of Marduk. Now, who was Marduk? All right. Well, Marduk was one of the many gods of the Babylonians. There were at least 8 gods of the Babylonians. In fact, in the city of Babylon, the name Babylon, by the way, means city of the gods, or gateway to the gods. And so there were 8 gates leading into the city of Babylon, each one named after one of the 8 primary gods that they worshipped. All right? Now, Marduk was the chief of the gods. We would also hear him called or know him as Zeus in Greek mythology, as Jupiter to the Romans, as Amun or Ra to the Egyptians. Okay? And his offspring was Nabu. And so this picture to the right there is a depiction of this god Marduk. Does he strike any resemblance to anybody we've seen recently? Yeah, a little bit like Nebuchadnezzar, doesn't he? All right. Now, right at the bottom of the screen, right here, see this creature at his feet. This is the creature that is associated with Marduk, and that is the creature, and I'm going to let you pronounce it. Good job. Must hush you. That's a tough one. He is a creature from Mesopotamian mythology, and he is associated with Marduk. All right. Now, all of the gods had animals or creatures of some sort associated with them. And as we're going to see next week, all of the gods also had musical instruments associated with them as well. But this image of this, however you say that, also appears on the Ishtar gate. Ishtar was the female goddess, a consort of Marduk. And this is a reconstruction of the Ishtar gate in the ruins or the ruins of Babylon that you can visit today. There's also a replica of this in New York City. And you'll be happy to know that our government spent $1 million helping in the construction of the Ishtar Gate in in Babylon. Doesn't that excite you? All right. Do you notice anything about the images on the gate? Can you see them well enough to make out what they are? Okay, right here. You've got the Mishishu, the associated with Marduk. The one right below it appears to be a unicorn. Again, associated with Ishtar. You might know Ishtar as Astarte, Aphrodite. All right? And so these are the gods and the goddesses of Babylon. Now, why is it important that we understand this and know what's going on here? Because, folks, what we've got in Daniel 2 is really a spiritual battle as well as a political and economic battle. I guess economic's a good word here. But we've got a spiritual battle and a political or geopolitical battle taking place that actually began way back in the book of Genesis. You know, when man fell in the Garden of Eden, a spiritual war started. We see it in the fact that of the prophecy in Genesis 3:15, where God told Eve that her seed would crush the head of the serpent, and he told the serpent that he would bite the heel of the seed of the woman. That began a war, a spiritual battle. We see it from that chapter all the way through the rest of the book of Genesis. We see it all the way through the book of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And when you go on through the rest of the Old Testament, you see that battle being constantly taking place. There was a spiritual battle in Egypt. There was a spiritual battle among the Israelites and the Philistines, which, by the way, lived in Gaza. Okay? This was a spiritual battle. It carries on into the New Testament. We see that spiritual battle taking place in the Gospel of Matthew when Jesus goes into the wilderness. What happens when Jesus is in the wilderness, other than the fact that he fasted for 40 days? He was tempted by Satan. Spiritual warfare. We take it over into the rest of the New Testament. How often do we see evidences of that spiritual battle in the rest of the New Testament? What does Paul say in Ephesians? We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against what? Principalities, powers, wickedness in the heavenly places. And so, folks, there's a spiritual warfare taking place. And there's a great attempt by man to prove he can rule this world just as good as God can. Right? And so I want you to look at chapter 2 through that lens of spiritual battle, spiritual warfare, and the fact that man is warring against God as to who is really in control of this planet. All right, y'all with me? All right. So, we know that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. Now, when did he have this dream according to chapter 2? in the second year of his rule. So we run into a little bit of a problem. And again, there are many who have taken there to be a contradiction here between chapters 1 and chapter 2. All right, so what would the contradiction be? If this dream happened in year 2 of Nebuchadnezzar's rule, it was the third year. Well, how do we know it was the third year? Because Daniel was in training, and that training lasted for how long? 3 years. And Daniel is the one who interprets the dream, and Daniel was already associated with the wise men of the day. So how can we have it 2 years or 3 years? So there are many skeptics, of course, who say, well, here's a contradiction. See, here's a contradiction in Scripture. So this must not be accurate. This must not be true. We can just throw the baby out with bathwater here because of this contradiction. But the contradiction really isn't a contradiction. It's just not misunderstanding of how time is kept and counted and how the Babylonians as well as the Jews kept time. So here's the simple explanation. Then we'll kind of go through the step-by-step of what took place so we can see how it happens. All right? The Babylonians did not count the year of coronation as being part of the king's overall rule. So neither the Jews nor the Babylonians took that coronation year as part of the rule. Any idea why that might be? What do you think? Break him in, okay? All right, and the potential of break him out. You know, is he going to make it? You know, will he be what they wanted? But again, probably the people didn't have much say, but he could be overthrown. He could be killed. Remember, folks, as soon as the king put that crown on, he had a target on his back. Now, how many siblings did he have? You know, what kind of folks were ready to get rid of him so they could step into his place? So, for the most part, I think that first year is not counted because maybe it was kind of a volatile year. But it was the coronation year. So, let's look at Nebuchadnezzar's life a little bit and see exactly when this plays out and exactly how it plays out. So, between May and June of 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar fought the Battle of Carchemish, which is in Turkey, about 250, maybe 300 miles from Jerusalem. Okay? He won that battle, and after that battle was fought, he dropped on down to Jerusalem and Judah, and he besieged the capital city, Jerusalem, and he captured it somewhere between June and August of that year. This was when the first deportation took place. All right? Remember, there were 3 altogether. This was the first one. Who was included in this deportation? Who? Daniel? Mostly royalty. Okay, this would have been the royal lineage. This would have been the wealthy of Israel. This would have been the elite of Israel. And so Daniel would have been one of those, and then we have 3 other companions named, and they're known in the Babylonian name as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, and so that deportation takes place, and we talked about all that last week. Well, during this time, basically kind of on the way home, Nabopolassar died. Nebuchadnezzar's father. So when he got back home to Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar was crowned king upon that return. All right? Now, that's the coronation year. And that would be year number 1 of Daniel's training. Right? Then after 2 more years, which is counted as the rule of Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel completed the 3 years of training. Is that making sense? Y'all with me? Okay. So, we've got to look at chapter 1 and chapter 2. It's happening fairly close together. In other words, not a lot of time passed between the close of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar having his dream happened shortly after Daniel and his companions were made part of the wise men of Babylon. Maybe that's why Daniel was not included in that crowd that was called to Nebuchadnezzar to get a dream interpretation. Because, as you read that chapter on, Daniel didn't know what was going on. He had to ask the king of the guards, why are you killing these guys and why are you after me? And so the king of the guard explained what was going on. Well, why? Because Daniel's the new kid on the block. He's still not got his stripes, so to speak, in the fact that he's not really considered in that group that Nebuchadnezzar would call in. All right? Daryl? He had no experience. Yeah. Plus he was what? Plus he was dealing with a psychopath. And that's probably very true too. So, verse 2, Nebuchadnezzar calls in the wise guys. And I couldn't think of a better term than that, than the wise guys. He calls in the wise guys. And who were these wise guys, or these wise men of Babylon? Well, the magicians, that's kind of a misfortunate translation here. The Hebrew really means engravers. And these would be the guys who would write down all of the laws, the rules, the scribes, so to speak, as well as all of the magical formulas and so forth that the others would use. So the engravers, the writers, the scribes. Next are the enchanters. And the enchanters are a special category of priests who practice incantations and astrology. Okay, so astrology is associated with what? The stars. Fast forward about 2,000 years, and you've got 3 wise guys, 3 magi, and there's probably more than 3, but we say there were 3. Why? Because of the 3 gifts that were given. That's the only reason we say there's 3. There were probably many more than that. But who were they? Well, they were the magi, the wise men of Babylon. They were the astronomers, the astrologers. And what did they say? Why did they come to Jerusalem? What was their reason for coming? They saw something. What did they see? A star. We saw his star. And so we knew it was time. All right, and so these enchanters were the astrologists and astronomers of the day. All right, so again, they're looking to the stars for answers. Things haven't changed much, have they? Do you know anybody that reads their horoscope every single day? Hopefully you don't do that. What's a horoscope? Well, it's supposed to be the stars dictating your life. Chick?
We have an account of this in Numbers chapter 24.
Okay.
His name is called Balaam.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, he predicts in that chapter
Yes.
the star
Yes.
and the scepter.
The star and the scepter, exactly.
So, that was predicted, I don't know when Numbers was written, but it was a long time before Jesus.
A long time before Jesus. It is a part of the Pentateuch, part of what Moses wrote. Moses wrote Numbers as well. All right. So the enchanters. Then we have the sorcerers. This is the first time in the book of Daniel that the term sorcerer is used. And it means magician or performer of magic spells. So think of sorcerers. These would have been priests of their gods as well. So again, go back to Egypt. and Moses standing before Pharaoh, and Moses throws his staff down, and it turns into a serpent. What happens? There's sorcerers of the Egyptian court did the same thing. Okay? And so this would be the sorcerers, the magicians, not the fake magicians that we see today, the illusionists. These would be folks who would be considered to be performing true evil magic. Okay? And then we've got the Chaldeans. All right, and it's interesting. The Chaldeans, it says that spoke Syriac or Aramaic. This was a special priesthood, a special class that was made up of only Chaldeans. In order to be part of this, you had to be a Chaldean, nobody else. They were foreigners to Babylon, like the Jewish captives were, who were allowed to become magicians, enchanters, and sorcerers, and only Chaldean nationals could enter into this special priesthood. Now, here's something that you may not have caught earlier. Who founded the Chaldean Empire? Did you catch it earlier on? Who was it? Nebuchadnezzar's father. Nabopolassar. So that means what? Nebuchadnezzar was a Chaldean. So no wonder the Chaldeans were allowed. Nebuchadnezzar was a Chaldean himself. All right? So we got the stage set. Now Nebuchadnezzar makes a demand. And what was his demand? What did he want them to do? He couldn't remember it. He knew it was important. He knew he dreamt something that was of major import, but he couldn't remember exactly what it was. And so he wanted these Chaldeans, these wise guys, to tell him what his dream was and then give him the interpretation. And again, I heard at least one preacher say that, this was a test to see exactly how legit these guys were. I don't know about that. I think at this point, Nebuchadnezzar didn't remember. He was desperate to find out, and so he brought in the folks that he thought could help him. And when they said, well, tell us the dream, his frustration came out and said, I'd tell you the dream if I could, but I can't. I don't remember it. Does that ever happen to you, folks? All the time. My wife always asks me in the morning, did you have any dreams last night? And I say, yeah. Can't remember one of them, but I dreamt all night long. Now, folks, have you ever had a dream so vivid? I call them 3D, high-definition dreams. They're so vivid that you can actually feel, taste, and touch what's going on. Has it ever happened to you? It's really unnerving. I mean, it's so you wake up thinking, did that really happen? And then, after a period of time, that dream goes away from you too, and you can't remember it. So I think that's kind of what we've got going here with Nebuchadnezzar. He had one of these very 3D, very high-definition dreams, and obviously it did not come out of his own imagination. It wasn't the chili he had the night before. This came from a different source, and I think Nebuchadnezzar is realizing that. He's realizing that this dream has some importance. There's something about it that is sending someone that's trying to give him a message. And the only place he knew to go to find out what this message was and who sent it was to the gods that he worshiped. And so he's looking to his gods and the representatives of his gods, the wise guys, the representative of his gods, to give him an answer to this troubling dream that he's got. And he found out they couldn't do it. They had no way. And so the rest of the story. We get to the image, and we know what the image is only because of what took place with Daniel. And don't you love Daniel's first words when he comes to Nebuchadnezzar? He comes and says, hey, Neb, there's nobody can tell you this dream. Nobody on earth. Now, at that point, I can almost see Nebuchadnezzar reaching for his sword. Because what was his decree? You can't tell me, you're dead. We're going to tear you limb from limb. So I think Daniel quickly says, but, corner word, but, oh great king, there's a God in heaven that can reveal to you. Yahweh, the God of the Jews, the only God, the only true God, the God of the Jews, He can reveal to you this image, this dream. And so he tells him what the dream was, and he tells him about the image. So here's where we need to spend the rest of our evening. What was this image, and what is its importance in the scheme of things? Daniel chapter 2 really becomes a pivotal point in all of history and all of prophetic history. Now, I'd like to read a little bit from what Tim LaHaye has in his introduction to chapter 2 concerning the prophecies of Daniel. I won't read the whole thing, but he says some good stuff here. He says, think of the prophecies of Daniel as the steel superstructure of a great building to which are attached walls, roof, floors, and so forth. All the subsequent Bible predictions are attached to the superstructure of Daniel. So the rest of prophecy is attached to Daniel's prophecies. Now, you've probably read it in your book by Amir. You've heard him probably say this, that to understand the book of Revelation, what must you understand first? The book of Daniel. In fact, I heard Amir say he wrote Revelation first, but now he wishes he could go back and redo that. He wishes he would have written Daniel first, his book on Daniel first, then his book on Revelation, because you don't understand Revelation if you don't understand the book of Daniel. Why? Because everything is tied to this belt, if you would, that girds the loins of prophecy. All right? The two primary parts of the framework are the times of the Gentiles and the 70 weeks concerning Israel and Jerusalem. Everything else, the broad expanse of human history, the first and second comings of Christ, and all the details supplied by the Lord through His prophets and apostles are attached to this magnificent superstructure. Already by the time of Daniel, the following prophetic truths have been revealed to God's chosen nation Israel. One, that Israel would be the channel of the Lord's great messianic kingdom on earth, the Abrahamic covenant and Jacob's prophecy concerning Judah. Number two, the Davidic dynasty would be the catalyst behind Messiah's authority, with Jerusalem and Israel the basis of his ruling operations. And then number three, the suffering servant of the Lord would make possible future blessings with his redemptive sacrifice for sins and his resurrection from the dead. All this revelation and much more may not have been fully understood by Israel. After the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem, the entire promised program of God appeared to be in total shambles. As Jerusalem and Israel lay in ruins, the Davidic dynasty was cut off in disgrace, and the people of Israel and Judah languished in the heart of ancient paganism 1,000 miles away from the land of promise. Many other prophecies about Israel's glorious future appeared to be conditioned upon the obedience of Israel to the Lord, and obedience seemed to be a rare commodity among God's chosen people in Babylon in Daniel's time. Daniel and the people had clung to the prophecy of their contemporary Jeremiah that the Babylonian captivity would only last 70 years. So the book of Daniel stands as a monument of predictive truth. It is often compared to the book of Revelation, and in truth, the book of Revelation cannot be understood apart from the foundation laid in the book of Daniel. An understanding of Daniel and Revelation constitutes the basis of biblical prophecy. So why is it important we understand Daniel? If we're going to understand what's going on, folks, we better understand what's prophesied right here. And he introduces us to a term. Tim LaHaye does. And that is the term, the times of the Gentiles. Now turn to Luke chapter 21. And I did put it on the screen because I want you to turn there in your Bible so you can underline it and highlight it and read it there. Your translations, we got various translations. I'm reading from King James. It could be, your translation may word it a little bit differently. But in this section, verses 20 through 24, the destruction of Jerusalem is foretold, which would happen in 70 A.D. Okay? In fact, let's just go back to verse 20 and pick up our context there. It says that when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. So Jesus is now focusing in, he's talking to his disciples, and he's talking to the Jews. This is part of the Olivet Discourse. And he's answering a lot of questions, so you need to understand who he's talking to at any particular point to understand exactly what he's saying. So right here, he's talking to his disciples, and he's talking to the Jews. He says, and when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter therein. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. For there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all the nations. That happened in 70 A.D. The great dispersion. All right? And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. All right? So Jesus introduces this term, the times of the Gentiles. Now, when did the times of the Gentiles begin? No. Nebuchadnezzar. So what we have pictured for us in this image that we see, the head of gold, the chest and arms of silver, the abdomen and hips of bronze, legs of iron and feet of iron and clay. What do we see? This is a depiction of the times of the Gentiles, meaning that the Gentiles are in charge of Jerusalem for the most part. I know, the Jews are somewhat in charge of Jerusalem today, but not completely. You know that, right? What's that? Otherwise, the Dome of the Rock would be gone. Who controls the Temple Mount? The Muslims do. Right.
When the embassy came from Tel Aviv
Yes.
back to Jerusalem,
Yes.
Jerusalem became the official capital.
Yes, it did.
Israel.
But it's still not, but it's still not under total control by Israel. But it's coming. It's coming. But so what have we got? Well, he says the Gentiles are going to be in control, and they have been. Actually, they've been in control since the days of Nebuchadnezzar. Were the Jews in control of Jerusalem during the times of Jesus? No, the Romans were. The Jews have never had control, and especially full control, of Jerusalem until 1948. They didn't have it then. It was in 1960 when they actually got control of some of Jerusalem in the Six-Day War. And then they still do not have control of the Temple Mount. And so the times of the Gentiles actually began with Nebuchadnezzar, where the Gentiles would be in control of that region and of Jerusalem specifically. All right? You with me? Make sense? Now, folks, hang on, because this gets really interesting as we go. Now, immediately we start looking at the 5 parts, or the 4 parts of this great image. And we see, first of all, the head of gold. And Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar, O great king, king of kings, you are that head of gold. Now, what do you think happened in Nebuchadnezzar's mind when he heard that? Explosion! Talk about getting the big head. Nebuchadnezzar, I think, got the big head. There's probably a little question about that. But this head of gold, what are characteristics of gold? Shiny. Do what? What? Valuable. Shiny, valuable. Doesn't corrode. Sought after. Splendor. Valuable. Bling. Right? But there's a flaw to gold. What is it? It's very soft. Very soft. And so we have Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold, and Babylon was a city of splendor. Babylon was a place of beauty. In fact, it became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world because of its beauty and its splendor. But gold is soft. How long did Nebuchadnezzar rule Babylon? 43 years. 43 years. Now, folks, that's not very long. Now, how long did the Babylonian Empire last? I didn't put that on here, so you can't figure that out. You don't have to. When did the Babylonian Empire end? Do what? 539 BC is what it says here. What happened in 539 BC? The Medo-Persians. What was the event that allowed the Medo-Persians to actually get into Babylon and overcome the city? Let me give you a little phrase, see if it triggers anything. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. Handwriting on the wall. It was Belshazzar, who was a grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, who was the final ruler of the Babylonians, who took the articles of the temple out of storage and brought them into his drunken feast and used them to drink their drinks and just showed out. And what happened? Well, the handwriting on the wall, and Daniel was called in to interpret the handwriting. And what did he say? Oh, Belshazzar, this night, God's going to demand his justice. And within hours, the city was overrun by the Medes and the Persians, because while the party was going on, they didn't realize that the Medes and the Persians who had besieged the city were damming up the river to lessen the flow so that they could crawl under the wall and get into the city. And so this great head of gold fell in 539 BC to the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, the Medo-Persian Empire, breast of arms in silver, 539 to 331 BC. How long was that? Close to 200 years, 208 years to be exact. All right? Now, silver has beauty. Silver has value. Is it as valuable as gold? No. Is it harder than gold? Yes. And so again, you've got that hardness kind of depicting how long this civilization ruled and reigned. So the Medo-Persians, and we could go into a whole lot here. I'm not going to try to take that time tonight. Let me encourage you to study the Medo-Persian Empire, and you'll understand why the two arms, because there were two generals that actually were a part of the Medo-Persian Empire that took over, all right? So the breast and arms of silver last about 200 years, stronger than gold, but of lesser value than gold. Then we get to the belly and thighs of bronze, which would be the Greek Empire, who was the reigning ruler and conqueror of the Greek Empire in 331 BC. Alexander the Great. The Greek Empire ruled in this area to 168 BC, approximately 163 years. Alexander was a great conqueror, a great soldier, a great warrior, but he died young. Right? Bronze. What do you know about bronze? First weapons were made from bronze. It's harder than silver. Now, don't confuse bronze and brass. Bronze is an alloy, if I understand my chemistry. It's an alloy with copper. So copper and brass are joined together to make bronze, and that makes the brass stronger, because brass is very soft, okay? So bronze is stronger, all right? It's not as pretty. What color is bronze? Kind of a brownish, yeah. You've seen a bronze statue, it's kind of a brownish color, okay? But it's much stronger than gold, and it's much stronger than silver. So you didn't see spearheads made out of gold, right? One, they were too expensive. Two, they were too soft. You didn't see spearheads made out of silver. Same reason. Now, I know the Lone Ranger has silver bullets, but that's a little different, okay? Bronze is stronger, and so you begin to see spearheads, spear tips, weapons made out of bronze because it is stronger, but it's kind of brittle, and it breaks pretty easily, all right? So you've got this bronze, which is Greece, right? It lasted for 163 years. And then, of course, we would get into the Maccabees at that point, who overthrew the Greek Empire, who reestablished the worship in the temple. And that's where Hanukkah came. The origins of Hanukkah came during that time when the Maccabees reestablished worship in the temple. But then came along the legs of iron. And who are the legs of iron? Rome. Rome basically conquered Greece in 168 BC. Rome, and I'm going to use this term very loosely, fell in about 476 BC. And I say fell then because it was then that the last emperor of Rome was deposed in 476 BC. But most historians will say Rome never really fell. It just what? Kind of faded away. Right. Okay, say that again. The Congress and the Senate took it over. Now, you're laughing, but that's very important. That's very important in what I think all of this is going to spell out for us. All right? So, before we get there, though, let's talk about the Roman Empire. It's made of iron. What's the characteristics of iron? It's very strong, hard as a rock. It can be sharpened. They begin to make weapons and tools out of iron because they would withstand the pressure, withstand the punishment. They were stronger. And so here we have Rome, a picture of an empire made of iron. It's strong. That's why it lasted 600 plus years before it kind of faded away. So we have a strong empire, a strong nation. Now, why do we have two legs, Chick?
Rome divided into Rome and Constantinople. Constantinople then gave rise to the Ottoman Empire.
Yes.
It gave rise to two.
Yes.
And I contend that we have so often said that the Antichrist will come out of the revived Roman Empire.
Yes.
I agree with that. I just don't think it'll be out of Rome. I think it'll be out of some combination out of the Muslim Empire.
In other words, what you're saying is that the Roman Empire still has two legs. Okay? And those two legs are a Western and an Eastern. Okay? And today we would know the Western division as the European markets, common market, the European nations. And we would know the Eastern leg as? The Muslims. Okay? The Muslim Empire, if you would.